Chapter 6, Part 4.
Another lasting friendship in the elite of the English theater was with Ellen Terry's famous partner, Henry Irving. Terry always referred to him as his nibs. His nibs. It was not for some 20 years that he was to receive his knighthood, the first ever bestowed on an actor. But it is difficult to think of that elegant and scholarly gentleman as anyone but Sir Henry. He and Terry had launched their highly successful co-starring career at the Lyceum, which under the brilliant Irving management had become the most fashionable playhouse in London. It was due to Harry Irving that the social status of stage people had risen. He had an ornament to any gathering, as was his beguiling partner, and daring hostesses were venturing to invite the other acceptable actors and actresses into their drawing rooms. Henry Irving had given a welcoming supper party for the Comédie Française company shortly after their opening, but it was later at a charity reception that he and Bernhardt got better acquainted. Like most of these ghastly functions, it was tortuously boring, and the place was hot and overcrowded. The two celebrity victims were exhibited side by side on a raised platform while a perspiring public filed past to stare and shake hands. Irving had as stubborn a resistance to the French language as Bernhardt had to the English, but the two got along famously. Most of the persons there were frumpy, middle-aged ladies, fat, red-faced, and wearing over-elaborate dresses and ludicrous hats. As the line of them came beaming up to be introduced, they began to strike the two guests of honor as unbearably funny. They got into a joint fit of giggles, which neither could control, and eventually had to make an unceremonious dash from the hall. Once outside, they fell into each other's arms in paroxysms of laughter, and after this they were fast friends until Irving's death in 1905. The language barrier being no problem, they communicated in their own Esperanto and always enjoyed themselves perfectly. During Bernhardt's subsequent visits to London, Sir Henry always gave her a dinner in his famous beefsteak room of the Lyceum Theatre. Beefsteak room of the Lyceum Theatre. As some writer put it, the Queen of the French theatre was entertained by the reigning monarch of the English. Sir Henry's beefsteak room was an impressive Gothic hall, hung with banners and decorated with theatrical armor. On the walls were portraits of Garrick, Keene, Irving himself, and later Sargent's magnificent canvas of Terry as Lady Macbeth. Here the great actor had received such notables as Liszt, Liszt, Tennyson, and Kipling. Martin Harvey wrote of Irving, seated at the head of a long table lighted with candles and loaded with good things. A great fire crackling in the broad baronial hearth, his clear-cut alabaster profile outlined against the somber oaken paneling. On one of the occasions of Bernhardt's visits, Irving remarked in a tone of philosophical resignation that age comes to us all. At this gloomy prediction, Sarah leaned across to Ellen Terry and said, "My darling Nell, there are two people who shall never grow old, you and I." Her triumph at the Gaiety made Sarah Bernhardt more in demand than ever. The invitations continued to pour in. Many she ignored, others she accepted, or rather, she'd instruct Madame Gerard to accept for her. Then, at the last minute, she'd decide not to attend, whatever the occasion was, or she'd arrive outrageously late. Such behavior was not an act on her part. It was simply that the social amenities seemed to her a waste of time. She was equally cavalier in regard to the private recitals Jarrett had arranged, and kept a sizable audience at Lady Cambermere's waiting on gold chairs for 1 hour. And kept a sizable audience at Lady Cambermere's waiting on gold chairs for 1 hour before she put in an appearance. She, who in the theater was punctuality itself, regarded these non-pro obligations as being of little importance except for the extra money they afforded. She seldom wrote a note of thanks for gifts or courtesies received. If she did, the note was almost undecipherable. She said of her own careless handwriting, Que voulez-vous? I am too busy living to finish my words. Que voulez-vous? I'm too busy living to finish my words. She didn't care what she said or to whom she said it. One of her often quoted replies was to a dowager countess, who, hearing her mention her son, said, I didn't know you were married. I am not, Madame Comtesse, she answered sweetly. My son was un petit accident d'amour. Smart society forgave her because she was the sensation of the current season. Ultra-conservative aristocracy failed to share the enthusiasm. Lady Frederick Cavendish wrote to a friend, London has gone mad over the principal actress in the Comédie Française who are here. Sir Bernhardt, a woman of notorious character. Not content with being run after on the stage, this woman is asked to respectable people's houses to act, even to luncheon and dinner, and all the world goes. It is an outrageous scandal. There is little doubt that Sarah enjoyed this popular uproar. Society per se meant nothing to her. Even the attentions of royalty were like so many good press notices, no more. If it had not been for the reminder from a friend, she would have forgotten completely to go to a party to which she had been invited in honor of the heir presumptive. In honor of the heir presumptive. Large functions bored her. What counted with her were the invitations, the tangible proof of having brought herself to this degree of importance. This complex woman, for all of her success, all her eccentricity, all her je m'en fiche, approximately don't give a damnism, fichisme, je m'en fichisme, approximately don't give a damn ism, needed constant bolstering of her ego. Her popularity was not confined to the smart set. In literary and artistic circles, she was sought after as the shibboleth of the intellectuals. Shibboleth? Oh. The shibboleth of the intellectuals. The pencil. Sorry. Pardoning, I lost my spot because I was looking for a pencil to circle shibboleth so I can remember to look it up, and I need it. Cavendish, White Room, Fichisme needed constant bolstering of her ego. Popular was not confined to smart set and literary artistic curses. Okay. In literary and artistic circles, she was sought after as the shibboleth of the intellectuals and the darling of bohemian London. Oscar Wilde gave her supper parties in his Salisbury Street flat, where she wrote her name on the wall of his White Room, along with the other signatures of the brilliant and famous. The painter Burne-Jones, who had worshipped her in Paris, continued his worship in England and was to do so for the remainder of his life. Some years later, he entrusted Graham Robertson with a note to deliver to the lady, saying, Will you give the enclosed to the supreme and glorious one, kneeling as you give it? Jarrett was arranged for an exhibition of Bernhardt's sculptures and paintings in a fashionable Piccadilly art gallery. The opening was spectacular. 100 invitations had been sent out, and 4 times that many persons turned up. The event was under the genial patronage of the Prince of Wales, who brought with him his beautiful princess. Gladstone also attended. The grand, vital old statesman had a love of France and things French. He and Mademoiselle Bernhardt held an agreeable 10-minute conversation, mainly exchanging views on capital punishment, of which they had both disapproved. The president of the Royal Academy, Sir Frederick Leighton, complimented the artist on her Palm Sunday, a canvas of a saccharine little girl piously holding a palm leaf in folded hands. This masterpiece was also admired by the heir apparent and later purchased by his brother Prince Leopold, which gives one an idea of the sense of art values both of the Royal Academy and of the sons of Queen Victoria. 10 pictures were sold and 6 pieces of sculpture, including a bronze casting of her Après le Tempête, the old Breton woman with her drowned grandson, for which some misguided titled lady paid £400. The artist, the Piccadilly Gallery in Jarrett, made a nice little profit. Man, that's so disturbing. The exhibition was enthusiastically written up in papers, but only in the society pages. What genuine art critics thought of it has, perhaps mercifully, not come down to us. To do her justice, Bernhardt never took herself too seriously as either a painter or a sculptress. She knew she had a certain facility in these pursuits. They served as outlets for her boundless energy. Also, she was finding in them a source of additional income, but she was honest enough to realize that her work sold chiefly because of her signature on the bottom of each. Now, I don't know if I saw the one that I saw of the lady with the sun was pretty significant, I would say. I mean, you don't see people do stuff like that now. It's pretty cool. No. Anyways, the Sarah Bernhardt craze would not have kept up in London if her art as an actress had not also kept up to public expectation. In each performance of the varied repertory, Hernani Zaire, L'Intragere, and the rest, always she acted with the same magic. Always that incandescent glow seemed to emanate from her, and always the reviews were raves. Every time she was billed to appear, the box office took in £150 more than on other nights. She found this very satisfactory. Another well-satisfied person was the shrewd manager who had booked her private recitals. He sensed what the future might hold for Sarah Bernhardt and also for Edward Jarrett. One day he called on her and asked her point blank if she'd like to make a fortune. Never averse to such a possibility, she inquired how, and he proposed a 6 months tour of the United States. Sarah gasped and said that the comedy would never grant her so long a leave. Besides, she could act only in French. Jarrett said that leave from the comedy might be arranged. As for the language problem, he assured her she could act in Chinese and the Americans would turn out in droves to see her. Sarah laughed and graciously dismissed him, though she didn't altogether dismiss the idea. She had conquered the civilized English. It might be an interesting challenge to find out if she could conquer the barbaric Americans. Why should she have to toady to the Français for permission? She put the idea aside for further deliberation and turned to other projects. Zest for her work in the theater never palled, but all the extracurricular social world was becoming a bore. She was fed up with meeting so many people. She had always found animals more interesting. For some months, she had hankered to own a young pet lion. Someone told her of a man named Cross who ran a zoo in Liverpool and who had 2 lion cubs, and she made up her mind then and there to acquire them both. Since coming to London, she had already collected a small menagerie, 3 dogs, Minocchio, Bull, and Fly, a parrot called Busy Boozoo, and a monkey she christened with the inspired name of Darwin. Profiting by some free time, when she was out of the bill at the Gaiety, she and some friends hopped a train for Liverpool and drove to the Cross Zoo. She looked up the owner, introduced herself, and said she wanted to buy his lion cubs. Mr. Cross, without further communication, led her to a large cage where she confronted the former cubs, who had grown to dimensions comparable, it would seem, to those of the majestic beasts guarding Nelson's column of Trafalgar Square. She had to admit that as potential pets they were a bit oversized. She hesitated before the elephants. She adored elephants and longed, she said, to own one, but again the size problem arose. After feeding one a full bag of peanuts, lovingly caressing its trunk, she went on to inspect the rest of the collection. She eventually settled for a young and playful cheetah, which, Mr. Cross said, could be trained to hunt antelope, a useful attribute for a house pet. She also purchased a gigantic wolfhound with bristling coat and sharp pointed fangs, which proved as docile as a spaniel. By way of a dividend, Mr. Cross presented his distinguished customer with 6 chameleons of the ordinary variety, as well as a rare specimen of the same reptile that had the body of a miniature prehistoric monster and the protruding eyes of a lobster. Each eye focused independently of the other. Much of the time they were crossed, and by way of tribute to the donor, Sarah named it Crossy Crossga. She thought the grotesque beastie completely charming and insisted upon going to a jeweler to have a tiny gold chain festooned about its neck, a job the jeweler could hardly have relished. Then she pinned the end of the chain to the lapel of her jacket as an ornament to wear, she said, when she was in a reptilian mood. It was still light when they arrived back at Sarah's house. The evening was balmy, and the customary gathering of friends were waiting for her in the garden. In addition to the ever-present Madame Gerard, there were Louise Abema and Georges Clarin, who were house guests. Gustave Doré had dropped by. Doré was very much the thing in London, and according to E.F. Benson, was fairly crawling with popularity, and ran his own Doré gallery in Bond Street. With him was an Italian portrait painter named Giuseppe de Nitis, and a young composer whose name is of no importance. The hour was serene. Minocchio, Bull, and Fly were dozing on the grass beside the guests. Beezy Boozoo was peacefully observing the sunset from the top of his cage, and Darwin, on the end of a long rope, searched himself for fleas with the sad expression of an ancient philosopher. The returning hunters went directly into the garden and let loose their live trophies. The cheetah made a joyful bound for the 3 small dogs, who shot for some bushes under which they cowered yelping, while the cheetah, delighted with its success, growled triumphantly. The wolfhound, apparently mistaking Darwin for a wolf, streaked after the poor simian, who fled up a tree, chittering in terror. The parrot flew about, squawking and letting out droppings, and the chameleons did nothing of note. Madame Gerard screamed and crossed herself. The butler dropped a tea tray. De Nitis kept flailing the air with his cane. Doré walked with stately alacrity into the house, and everyone else, including Sarah, burst into maniacal gales of laughter. Passers-by peered in amazement over the garden wall, and scores of faces appeared at the windows in the dignified houses surrounding Chester Square. It is generally known that number 77 had been leased to the questionable celebrity, and rumors concerning fantastic goings-on in the place began to spread. It was said that Sarah Bernhardt had a menagerie of carnivorous wild animals running loose in her garden, that inside the house on certain nights she held a witch's sabbath, that every morning she stood on her balcony smoking cigars, that she practiced pistol shooting in her backyard, that she was taking boxing lessons and had broken 4 of her instructor's teeth, and that for the price of 1 guinea she would exhibit herself dressed in man's attire. A gullible portion of the public believed these idiocies. 2 boxing and fencing masters sent her their cards. A tailor offered to make her a gentleman's dress suit, not only gratis. He'd pay her £100 if she'd pose in it for an autographed picture to be placed in his window. And she received several boxes of cigars from unknown admirers.